Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and on this show, I talk about things in relationships. I can talk about as an individual, how relationships affect you, how to handle difficult situations, just things that come up in life. And I'm going to share a bit of a personal story. I am trying to do that more, and it has to do with being healthy. Now, I'm generally a pretty healthy guy, but one of the things that happens in my own case is because for what I would expect, I get a little snivel and I take some over-the-counter medication and it's fine. And for most people, that's how we handle problems like that. I don't like to make a bunch of noise about it. I have a lot of responsibilities in that I tend to put myself last. Well, I have, over the last several months, developed a lot of anxiety about a couple of things. And, I finally opened up to some friends about how I was feeling. And one of which was to go get some blood work done, and everything has come out fine. But here's the thing. This flu thing that has been going around for the last couple of years, and there's a flu season, and it's typically late fall, winter into early spring for a lot of folks. And with the weather being kind of crazy the way it is, who knows how long the flu season actually lasts. But I caught a little bit of it and started to feel really strange. And they tell you to be really careful about this because it can really turn into something that you can't handle. Well, in my particular case, that didn't happen. I just basically had a cold, but I took some over-the-counter meds and got better with that. But just the same, I remember waiting before I finally decided to do something about the problem, which for a lot of people, that could spell disaster. Now, I had a lot of anxiety around my situation because, again, being a person who's really responsible and not wanting to alarm anyone else, I'm just kind of sitting with this in my own space, wondering what to do. Do I go to the doctor? Do I just take some over-the-counter medication? And in my own particular case, I don't have a problem with my health plan. Some people, health insurance obviously it's a huge expense and in my budget, but I have it available. But for some reason, I didn't want to inconvenience myself or alarm anyone else. And I just tried to handle that. Now, so what would make me do that? I think that's where I'm going. And it's one of these things that when you're a caretaker, you tend to put yourself last. And we have to learn to not do that so much. When you have a concern, you need to talk about it. You need to find somebody that you confide in, you could trust, and verbalize these things, because I think when you hear them out loud, you begin to hear, hey, this is not necessarily the best course of action, meaning just to sit back and not do something about it. Because in the case of myself, it turns out that things are okay. Did blood work, all the numbers and things are fine. Did a stress test, running the treadmill and thing, and it was great. And I'm much more relieved. But you take an individual that tends to put off taking care of their health in a way that would at least bring these things to the attention of some. And we probably if we don't know somebody, we've definitely heard of people who looked reasonably very healthy on the outside, and then we find out that they either have an illness that had it been detected earlier, there could have been something that was done about it, or we find out that they died. And I think that's the one that really gets our attention, because there are a lot of individuals out there that really do try to do everything they can to take care of their health, and then something happens to them. And it seems like such a tragic story, because in the case of those individuals who, had they just gone to the doctor, had they just did that part instead of sweeping it under the rug, they might be here today. And I certainly didn't want to become one of those kinds of statistics. But I got over that hump because I actually shared my feelings with some friends, and they really encouraged me to go to the doctor, get tested, get your heart checked, and I'm a guy, so you know what? Had to do the old prostate check, which is the doctor does his job, and forget the modesty, put that stuff aside. This is about medical self-care. And now I'm better for it. I've been able to put that part behind me, and I'm going to go on. So, if you're a guy and you're listening to this broadcast, think about it. Take care of yourself so that you can take care of those in your life that you care about. Because if they lose you, for whatever reason, that is going to be so much sadness. And do not put yourself at risk for being one of those who was too macho to want to go to see the doctor. They're there to help. And believe me, there's a lot of things that they've heard, and you're not going to be the first if you have something that you really need to talk to them about, and you're protected. They understand how modest some of us are, how embarrassing some of these situations and circumstances could be, but get help. Now, one other thing I'm going to talk about in this podcast is when to seek therapy. That, for a lot of people, may be one of those questions. And, when do you go to see a therapist? Why? What would bring you to a therapist? I think when you have problems in life that you just don't seem to be able to get a handle on. And I'm not talking about just, being able to get out of bed in the morning. I'm talking about when you're having conflict with people you care about, even people you don't care about, having an anger management issue. You're stumbling over something that you just can't get past. Seeking a therapist, I think, would, for a lot of people, make a lot of sense. If you were studying math and you couldn't figure out a problem, you would seek out a tutor. Therapists are trained to help you with life's problems, just like a math tutor is there to help you with math problems. And I'm going to keep it that simple, because herein lies a key to improving your quality of life. Relationships with people affect you every single day, whether it's your children, your boss, your significant other, your parents, your siblings, and everything in between, strangers, everything in between. Because we see life through our own filter, and we are constantly reinforced. Our own impressions about life are reinforced day in and day out. And quite often, it is so skewed that we are not even in touch with reality. What therapists are there to help you do is get yourself realigned with reality. And in the case of myself, if I had gone to a therapist, we would have been talking about what my issues are in terms of why don't I go see the doctor. I happen to have some very, very caring friends who I was able to just have a conversation with them about it. And they were very supportive. If you happen to have that in life, great. But if you don't, a therapist is the best place to go to. It could be a minister at a church. It could be someone, if you're in a college situation, it could be a counselor in the office. If you're a young person in high school who's therapists, their counselors are there for you. There are people you need to reach out and make that something that you do for yourself. And it doesn't have to be a one-time thing. And you know what? Going to a therapist doesn't mean you do it forever and ever and ever. There's a beginning and end to this. But seek out knowledge. And it's not just enough to read a self-help book sometimes. There are great ideas, and I've read many books myself, many great authors. But I think sometimes it's very important to really seek that from another human being who has lived life, who's trained in these areas, because again, it's about getting us realigned with reality. We all need a reality check from time to time. And there's healthy ways to do it, and there's ways that are not so healthy. I think some of the not so healthy ways could be when we check in with, and I'm going to use the word, friends and associates who oftentimes just revalidate what you already do. And that may be what's causing you the problem, is that you are stuck. And I think friends mean well, but oftentimes they're not skilled enough to be able to give you reasonable advice. Okay, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to come back and talk about some of this some more. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And where I left off, I was talking about therapy. In getting therapy, getting help, getting a different perspective, and I've talked about this from time to time, and it's something that I definitely advocate. We as individuals try to help ourselves in a lot of different ways. Some of us do what I call retail therapy. We spend a lot of money. And hey, it's your money. You can spend it on yourself. Getting some therapy would be a good investment in your future. And I'm saying that because I think it's really helpful to get a different perspective. We go to all kinds of, I haven't used the word therapist, but we go to all kinds of people that give us advice. There's financial managers. We have supervisors. We have all kinds of people that are there giving us advice. And I think a good therapist is someone that can help you with life's problems so that you're not constantly kicking your foot on that same stone. So here's the thing. When a lot of people think of therapy, some people wonder, okay, so I get a therapist. How do I find them? You can find them online. You can find them by specialties. There are people that deal with child abuse issues. There are people that deal with children. There are individuals that deal with transgender, lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, queer. There are therapists that deal with all kinds of different subjects. And you can seek them out in that way. What's important is that you learn to feel comfortable with the individual so you could very well spend a little bit of money interviewing therapists to find out if this is someone who's going to work for you. They may offer a sliding scale, which is something that would be based on your income. There may be those that are available for a nominal fee for your first visit to see if it's something that works out. And one of the things that I want to share is therapy is not something that necessarily will work on 1 or 2 visits. And I've known a lot of people who have gone to a therapist and have made 1 or 2 visits and they think that they're cured. That's not likely to be the case, especially if you're dealing with something that you have been troubled with for years and years. Now, you may have an epiphany. You may get some clarity in a visit or 2, but I don't think you're going to be really solving problems, because more often than not, a therapy visit is going to be somewhere, 45 minutes to an hour, maybe longer if you book it a little bit longer. And an hour a week, if that's what it is not nearly long enough to fix your problem. So you're going to need to commit some resources to doing this, be it whether it's time or money or whatever it is. And health plans nowadays make room for something like this. So there shouldn't be the stigma associated with this the way it was before. Now, this is often, sometimes we have to talk about, bring it as part of the conversation, because this is, and to the guys out here, I want you to hear me, this is not a sissy thing to do, to get a therapist. It's a very grown-up, responsible thing to do. Here's why. When you recognize that there is a problem that needs to be solved, it's also important to realize that maybe you don't have all the tools to fix it. If you look in your toolbox, I'm going to use this analogy. You got a toolbox. And if you don't have the right tool to screw in the wall socket, if you need a standard screwdriver and all you have is a Phillips, you're going to need to get a standard. If it's not in your toolbox, you're going to go to the store and get one, right? That's what you do. That's how you solve the problem. This is what therapists are in our life. They are part of our toolbox. And what they can afford you is an opportunity to really listen to your side, listen to your feelings, validate you, and then as they've heard your story, then help you begin to understand not only yourself and why you do certain things, but to also help you improve your behavior. Because see, here's the thing. A lot of times we are so reactive as individuals. We don't know why we do what we do. We just do it. Then it has an outcome that's not very good. Maybe we treated someone poorly, or, hey, let's take the case of what happens to some people. They go out, they have some bad behavior, and then they run into law enforcement, run into the cops. And now you're dealing with it on that level. Well, for a lot of people, that's the wake-up call. And if you're headed, if your life is full of situations in which you are running into those kinds of things, then you really need to look at yourself and how you're behaving. Because you can't just say it's those people out there are causing me problems. You're causing problems for your own life. And it's about you getting the help. Some people, they have a run-in with the law, and then the law mandates that they get help, mandates that they seek some sort of anger management. And this could be men or women, so I'm not going to limit that. But I was at least giving an example of talking to guys. But, women, you need to hear this too. Because there are a lot of people that carry a lot of attitude. And this day and age, when it's really important, I think, that we return to a level of civility where we talk nice to people. It's not about popping off or showing who's the most macho or that sort of thing, because that really doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, you never know who you're running into. And I'm not making that as a threat, but quite often it's easy to misinterpret someone's intentions. Very easy. Now, there are a lot of people out there that aren't nice. We know that about the world. I mean, we see examples of that. I think it's important not to add to that problem. I think civility works, being nice, being kind, opening doors for people, using sir and ma'am and may I and please. Those are all good things. And I want to emphasize, it has always been a good thing to do. And it's nice when you're an example of that, because it does make people look at you differently. They're much more respectful. And when you give respect, you can expect it. You see, my tie-in is with this. When therapy in and of itself helps you get a handle on who you are being and potentially where you are headed, if you're the kind of person who's got a lot of bad behavior, who has a lot of wrecked relationships, or you abuse drugs, or wrecked a few cars, you're just going about just being a hellion, you need to really get the reality check. And let's hope it's not some sort of tragedy that's going to bring these situations to your attention. I wouldn't want that for you. But there again, we can reach back and we can get help for ourselves. And there's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of it out there. Some of it doesn't cost. Now, you may have to do your own research to get that. There's county mental health associations. There are universities, colleges and universities that have psychology programs. You might talk to somebody in the psychology department. They may be a great resource in pointing you in the right direction. I happen to know that some of the colleges in which they have students who are learning to become therapists, they have to practice a certain number of hours before they can become certified. Very often, they will take people on as clients for a sliding scale, or if for no money. But you do understand that they are students who are working towards their degree. That's an excellent resource. And I would, if I were in a situation where money were a problem, I would begin to look at things in that regard. So there's a few ideas for you. I like it when people are willing to face their problem and take it on. It can be a bit scary because it means change, and change is hard for a lot of us, me included. I'm going to take a break. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular episode, I've talked about a number of things. I talked about getting yourself help, seeing a doctor for yourself. When I was talking about me included, I gave some examples of things about myself. I talked about getting therapy, why, some things to look at in terms of, bonding with a therapist, how to find one. And I'm going to transition to something, and this has a little more in terms of the flavor of how to deal with family members. We all have situations in which we help people. And sometimes, in this day and age, with the economy having done some of its peaks and valleys, we've had relatives and people come move in with us. And one of the things that we take on was them, their stuff, their ways of being. And, it's family, it's friends. We love them. We want them to be okay. But oftentimes we sort of do this thing in the blind, hoping that they understand how to behave, what the expectations are. And ultimately, we expect them to move out. And many of us may have gotten ourselves into these situations and not know how to get ourselves out of it. We've had somebody move in and they don't leave. Okay, I'm going to talk about that and some things that if you haven't gotten into that situation, you certainly want to think about this ahead of time, because you may have a situation that somebody is considering it or asking you to consider it. And so what should you take on? I think that's the big question. Friends, family, it is, again, you do it out of love. But what should you take on? What can your family dynamic handle? If you've already got a full house, do you really want somebody else moving in with you? And obviously, if somebody's at your doorstep, how do you turn people away? That can be a very, very, very challenging thing to do. But you have to look at your situation. And I'm going to look at it from that standpoint. One of which is understand what your expectations are. When you have a guest that comes in, let's say you have a relative that's visiting from out of town and they're going to stay for a few days, you basically treat them like your home is a hotel. You care for them, you prepare the meals, you do things like that. But if you have somebody that's going to be moving into your house for a period of time, they're not there as hotel guests. They are going to need to be part of the functioning unit, whether it's doing dishes, taking out the trash, mopping, vacuuming, that sort of thing. And these people have to be able to operate in your machine as is part of, cleaning and scheduling things, like if it's sharing the shower or sharing, who gets to use the laundry. And in some cases it could be, when are they going to use the car? Those things, these oftentimes, these are situations we just kind of have a run in with, and we don't think about this. Well, I'm telling you this ahead of time. When you have people that are going to be operating in your space, with you at your family, you guys already have that rapport. You pretty much have your understanding about whether it's dysfunctional or not, you pretty much have your family. But when you're adding somebody else into this situation, you want to be thinking about this and whether your dynamic can handle adding somebody else to this. If it's a young kid, needs a place to stay for a while because you've got a relative that might be sick, yeah, you can probably handle that. The logistics of getting them to school, if they go with your kids, you just kind of add a little more water to the soup and you spread it out. But now you start adding grown-ups and their dynamic, and you see some of how their family operates. Now, these things could really come to clash. So you need to talk about this with those of your significant other first. Get a game plan. And if it's something that you haven't discussed, remember, talk about it now before you have people move in, because you're going to have to think about all of these dynamics, the utilities, what kind of expenses, the food, those kinds of things. Work that out in advance. Now, if you have a situation in which you've already got somebody in the house, and now you're going to have to figure out, okay, this thing isn't working out the way I wanted. Now, you're going to have to revisit this. If you didn't talk about a time limit when they first moved in, then you need to be having that conversation now. And whether they've fallen on hard times, we need to get that conversation on the table. In courtesy and respect, that's always part of my conversation. We need to do it in that way. We need to be respectful and allow people to have their dignity. But we need to be talking about these things because we want this moving the right direction. Because people can become dependent upon a situation and wind up taking advantage of the circumstance. And it would be very unfortunate for you to open your home, give your love to someone, and then not feel like it's appreciated. And this happens very often. The opportunity for these kinds of things happens quite often. And if that is happening in your circumstance, then you need to have a heart-to-heart talk about how it's impacting you. If you're having stress, and or your significant other is having stress because you have this house guest that is, say, maybe they're not as neat as you are, or maybe they borrow your car and it's inconvenient. Every time you go out and look in the driveway, man, your car is gone. I mean, it's nice to be a good host, but there are things that you can do that make the situation worse for you. And one of those is not having expectations. So you need to put a time limit on things, because you want that person who is a guest in your home, because remember, they're guests. Yeah, they're changing your dynamic. They're your guests, but you also want them in a place of remembering that this isn't a forever situation. They fell upon hard times, but you also want to help them put themselves back together, and giving them reasonable expectations actually helps them move on with their life. So I just want you to think about that. I'd like to put in a plug here for Sarah. She is one of the partners here at Golden State Media Concepts, and she, on many occasions, has hosted the Relationships Podcast, and she has a guest that she's going to be interviewing, and her guest's name is Karen L. Christensen. She's a professional life coach and writer, and a member of the Leading Women for Shared Parenting. Karen is a co-parent herself, and she has over 30 years of experience supporting adults tackling change to help them both survive and grow. Ms. Christensen writes for Divorce Magazine and the Huffington Post Canada. She lives in Surrey, British Columbia. So I invite you to tune in to the podcast in which Sarah is going to be interviewing Karen L. Christensen. My name is John Johnson, and I'm your host here for the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And I want to thank you for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.